The rain pounded against the windows of Martinez Auto Repair as Jake wiped his greasy hands on his coveralls. It was nearly closing time on a Thursday evening, and the small garage in downtown San Diego was quieter than usual. Jake had worked at this place for 8 years, earning a reputation as one of the best mechanics in the area. His boss, Richard Kellerman, owned 3 auto shops across the city and was known for his strict business policies and cold demeanor toward employees. Jake was finishing up an oil change on a Honda Civic when he heard the screech of tires outside, followed by a loud crash. He dropped his wrench and rushed toward the front of the garage, peering through the rain-streaked window. A motorcycle had skidded off the wet road and slammed into the concrete barrier just across the street. The rider lay motionless on the pavement, his bike twisted and smoking nearby. Without hesitation, Jake sprinted outside into the downpour. The rider was a young man in his 20s, wearing a leather jacket that was now torn and bloodied. His helmet had cracked on impact, and blood trickled from a gash on his forehead. Jake knelt beside him, checking for a pulse. The man was breathing but unconscious, and Jake could see that his left leg was bent at an unnatural angle. "Hey, can you hear me?" Jake called out, gently shaking the rider's shoulder. The man's eyes fluttered open, revealing intense blue eyes filled with pain and confusion. Jake noticed something that made him pause. A small Navy SEAL trident tattoo, visible on the man's wrist, where his jacket had torn. "Don't move, brother," Jake said softly. "You've been in an accident. I'm going to help you." He pulled out his phone and dialed 911, giving the dispatcher their location and describing the injuries he could see. The rain continued to fall heavily, soaking both men as Jake stayed by the injured rider's side. The wounded man tried to speak, his voice barely audible above the storm. My bike, is it?" he stammered, clearly disoriented from the impact. "Don't worry about the bike right now," Jake replied, taking off his jacket and draping it over the man to keep him warm. "What's your name?" "Marcus. Marcus Thompson," the rider whispered, wincing as he tried to shift his position. "Well, Marcus, I'm Jake. I'm a mechanic, and I served in the Army for 4 years before this. You're going to be okay, but you need to stay still until the paramedics get here." As they waited for the ambulance, Jake noticed that Marcus was shivering uncontrollably, likely going into shock. He ran back into the garage and grabbed several clean shop towels and a first aid kit. Returning to Marcus's side, he carefully pressed a towel against the head wound to slow the bleeding and used another to elevate the injured leg slightly. "You said you were in the Army?" Marcus asked, his voice stronger now, but still strained with pain. "Yeah, deployed to Afghanistan twice. Saw plenty of guys get banged up worse than this, and make full recoveries," Jake said, trying to keep Marcus conscious and calm. "That trident tattoo tells me you're Navy." "SEAL?" "Jake SEAL." Marcus nodded weakly. "Just finished my 2nd deployment. It was on leave. Riding back from visiting my sister up in LA. He paused, taking shallow breaths. "Was supposed to report back to base tomorrow morning." Jake felt a surge of respect and brotherhood toward this young warrior who had served his country with such distinction. He had always held deep admiration for Special Operations Forces, knowing the sacrifices they made and the dangers they faced. As he continued to monitor Marcus's condition, he found himself thinking about his own time in service and the bonds formed with fellow soldiers. The sound of sirens finally pierced through the storm, growing louder as the ambulance approached. Jake felt relief wash over him as the paramedics arrived and began their professional assessment of Marcus's injuries. They quickly confirmed what Jake had suspected: a serious concussion, a fractured left leg, several broken ribs, and various cuts and bruises. "You did good work here," one of the paramedics told Jake as they prepared to transport Marcus to the hospital. Keeping him warm and still probably prevented more serious complications. As they loaded Marcus onto a stretcher, he reached out and grabbed Jake's hand. "Thank you," he said with genuine emotion in his voice. "I mean it, man. Thank you for not just driving by." Take care of yourself, brother, Jake replied, squeezing Marcus's hand. Heal up quick and get back to doing what you do best. Jake watched the ambulance disappear into the stormy night, its red and blue lights fading into the distance. He stood there for a moment, soaked to the bone, thinking about the randomness of life and how quickly everything could change. Then he remembered he still had work to finish and headed back toward the garage. That's when he noticed his boss, Richard Kellerman, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed and an expression of barely controlled anger on his face. Kellerman was a thin man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp features that seemed permanently set in a scowl. He wore an expensive suit that somehow remained perfectly pressed despite the humid evening. "What the hell was that about, Martinez?" Kellerman demanded as Jake approached. "You just abandoned your workstation to play hero in the rain?" Jake was taken aback by his boss's tone. "There was an accident, Mr. Kellerman. A guy was seriously hurt, and I couldn't just leave him lying there." "That's not your job," Kellerman snapped. "Your job is to fix cars, not waste company time playing medic to every person who can't handle a motorcycle in the rain. While you were out there getting soaked, I had Mrs. Chen calling because her car wasn't ready when I promised it would be. I understand. But this was an emergency situation," Jake explained, trying to keep his voice respectful despite his growing frustration. "The guy was unconscious and bleeding. I'm trained in first aid, and someone needed to help him until the paramedics arrived." Kellerman's expression hardened further. "I don't care if you're trained to perform brain surgery. When you're on my clock, you work on my cars. Period. This isn't the first time you've let your military background interfere with your responsibilities here." Jake felt his temper rising but forced himself to remain calm. "With all due respect, sir, helping an injured person isn't interference. It's basic human decency. Human decency doesn't pay the bills or keep customers happy," Kellerman shot back. "I've been watching you, Martinez. You think your military service makes you special? Gives you some kind of license to do whatever you want around here? Well, let me remind you that this is a business, not a charity." The accusation stung Jake deeply. He had never used his military background to claim special treatment or privileges. If anything, his service had taught him discipline, responsibility, and the importance of looking out for others. He had always been a reliable employee, often staying late to finish jobs and taking pride in his work. "Mr. Kellerman, I've been working here for 8 years without any major problems," Jake said, trying to reason with his boss. "I've always done good work, and my customers are satisfied. Tonight was an exceptional circumstance." "Exceptional circumstances happen every day in business," Kellerman replied coldly. "What matters is how you prioritize. You chose to prioritize some stranger over your obligations to this company and our customers. That tells me everything I need to know about your commitment level." Jake realized that no amount of reasoning was going to change Kellerman's mind. His boss had clearly been looking for an excuse to confront him about something, and tonight's incident had provided the perfect opportunity. Jake had always sensed that Kellerman resented his military background, though he had never been able to understand why. "So what are you saying?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Kellerman pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to Jake. "I'm saying that your employment here is terminated, effective immediately. Your final paycheck is in there, minus the time you wasted tonight. Clean out your toolbox and be gone within the hour." Jake stared at the envelope in disbelief. He was being fired for helping an injured veteran. The injustice of it hit him like a physical blow, leaving him momentarily speechless. "This is unbelievable," Jake finally managed to say. "You're firing me for helping someone who was seriously hurt?" "I'm firing you for abandoning your post and prioritizing the wrong things," Kellerman corrected. "Maybe this will teach you that the real world doesn't operate on military principles. Here, you follow orders, or you find somewhere else to work." Jake looked around the garage that had been his second home for nearly a decade. His toolbox sat in the corner where he had left it, filled with thousands of dollars worth of equipment he had accumulated over the years. His workbay was organized exactly the way he liked it. With every tool in its proper place, pictures of completed restoration projects were pinned to the wall above his workbench, representing hundreds of hours of skilled labor and satisfied customers. "Fine," Jake said quietly, his voice steady, despite the turmoil he felt inside. "I'll pack up my things." As Jake began gathering his tools, several of his co-workers emerged from the back room where they had been watching the confrontation unfold. Tony, an older mechanic who had worked there even longer than Jake, shook his head in disgust. "This is wrong, Jake," Tony said loud enough for Kellerman to hear. "What you did tonight was the right thing, and everyone here knows it." Kellerman turned toward Tony with a warning look. "Unless you want to join him, I suggest you get back to work and mind your own business." Jake spent the next 45 minutes methodically packing his tools into their cases and boxes. Each item represented years of experience and careful investment in his craft. As he worked, he thought about Marcus Thompson lying in a hospital bed somewhere in the city, probably undergoing surgery to repair his broken leg. Despite everything that had just happened, Jake felt no regret about his actions. He would make the same choice again, without hesitation. When he finished packing, Jake took one last look around the garage. Several customers over the years had specifically requested that he work on their vehicles, trusting his expertise and honest approach to repairs. Some had become friends, bringing him coffee or lunch and staying to chat while he worked on their cars. All of that was now in the past. Kellerman stood by the front door, clearly waiting for Jake to leave. As Jake carried his last box of tools toward his truck, his boss called out one final comment. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before playing soldier boy on someone else's time." Jake stopped and turned around slowly. For a moment, he considered responding with the anger and frustration that had been building inside him. Instead, he chose to take the higher road. "Mr. Kellerman," he said calmly, "I hope you never find yourself lying injured on the side of the road, hoping that someone with basic human decency will stop to help you." With that, Jake loaded his tools into his truck and drove away into the stormy night. Unemployed, but with his principles intact, he had no way of knowing that his act of compassion toward Marcus Thompson would soon change both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Jake spent a restless night tossing and turning in his small apartment, replaying the events of the evening over and over in his mind. The unfairness of being fired for helping an injured person gnawed at him, but he tried to focus on the positive aspects of what had happened. He had potentially saved Marcus Thompson's life by staying with him and preventing him from going into deeper shock. That had to count for something, even if his boss couldn't see past his own narrow business interests. The next morning, Jake woke up early despite having barely slept. He made coffee and sat at his kitchen table, staring at the classified ads in the local newspaper. The job market for experienced mechanics was decent in San Diego, with several shops advertising openings. However, Jake knew that word would spread quickly in the tight-knit automotive community about his firing from Martinez Auto Repair. Kellerman had connections throughout the city and wasn't above bad-mouthing former employees who had crossed him. As Jake circled potential job opportunities with a red pen, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but he answered anyway. "Hello, this is Jake." "Jake Martinez?" The voice was professional but warm, with a slight southern accent. "Yes, that's me." "Who is this?" "This is Captain Patricia Wells from Naval Special Warfare Command. I'm calling about Marcus Thompson. I understand you were the person who helped him after his motorcycle accident last night." Jake was surprised to hear from someone in Marcus's chain of command so quickly. "Yes. I was there when he crashed. I stayed with him until the paramedics arrived." "How is he doing?" "Marcus is going to be fine, thanks in large part to your quick actions," Captain Wells replied. "The doctors said that keeping him warm and still likely prevented more serious complications from his injuries. He's scheduled for surgery on his leg this afternoon, but he should make a full recovery." "That's great news," Jake said, feeling genuine relief. "I was worried about him all night." Marcus told us what happened, including how you lost your job because you stopped to help him. Is that accurate? Jake hesitated, not wanting to sound like he was complaining or looking for sympathy. Well, yes. But I want you to know that I don't regret helping him for 1 second. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Captain Wells was quiet for a moment before responding. Jake, can I ask you a personal question? What's your background? I'm a mechanic. Been doing it for about 12 years total. Before that, I served in the Army for 4 years. Did 2 deployments to Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne Division. What was your specialty in the Army? I was a combat engineer, but I also worked on vehicle maintenance when we were between missions. That's actually how I got interested in becoming a full-time mechanic after I got out. Captain Wells seemed pleased with his answer. Marcus was very impressed with how you handled the situation last night. He said you knew exactly what to do, and kept him calm until help arrived. He also mentioned that you recognized his SEAL tattoo and that you two connected over your shared military experience. Marcus is a good man, Jake said. I could tell right away that he was someone who had served with distinction. It was an honor to help him. Jake, I have a proposition for you, if you're interested. We have a contract position opening up at the Naval Special Warfare Command facility here in San Diego. We need someone to maintain and repair the specialized vehicles that our teams use for training and operations. It's not a permanent military position, but it would be working directly with our people and supporting their mission. Jake nearly dropped his phone. Working with Navy SEALs would be an incredible opportunity, far beyond anything he had imagined when he woke up that morning. That sounds amazing. But I have to ask, why are you offering this to me? Because Marcus specifically recommended you, Captain Wells explained. He was so impressed with your character and competence that he asked me to look into your background. When I learned that you had been fired for helping him, well, let's just say that told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person you are. I'm definitely interested, Jake said, trying to keep his excitement in check. What would the position involve exactly? You'd be working on a variety of vehicles, everything from modified trucks and motorcycles to specialized watercraft, and even some experimental equipment I can't discuss over the phone. The work requires top-level security clearance, so there would be an extensive background check process. The pay is significantly better than what most civilian mechanics make, and you'd be supporting some of the finest warriors our country has ever produced. Jake felt like he was dreaming. 24 hours ago, he had been fired from a job he had held for 8 years. Now he was being offered what sounded like the opportunity of a lifetime. What's the next step? If you're serious about this, I can arrange for you to come in next week for an initial interview and facility tour. You'd meet with our technical staff and get a better sense of what the job entails. Are you available Monday morning? Absolutely, Jake replied without hesitation. Captain Wells, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this opportunity. It's like something out of a dream. Jake, let me be clear about something, the captain said, her tone becoming more serious. This isn't charity or a reward for doing the right thing last night. We're offering you this position because we think you have the skills and character we need. If you don't perform up to our standards, you'll be out just as quickly as any other contractor. Are you prepared for that level of accountability? Yes, ma'am, Jake answered immediately. I've never been afraid of hard work or high standards. If anything, I perform better when more is expected of me. Good. I'll have my assistant email you the details for Monday's appointment, including directions to the facility and what documentation you'll need to bring. In the meantime, I'd recommend that you don't discuss this opportunity with anyone outside your immediate family. Security is paramount in everything we do. After Jake hung up the phone, he sat in stunned silence for several minutes. The dramatic reversal of his fortunes seemed almost too good to be true. Yesterday evening, he had been a regular mechanic working in a civilian auto shop. Now, he was potentially on the verge of joining one of the most elite military organizations in the world, even if only as a contractor. Meanwhile, across town at the hospital, Marcus Thompson was preparing for surgery when Captain Wells arrived to visit him. His leg was immobilized in a complex brace, and various monitors tracked his vital signs. Despite his injuries and the pain medication, Marcus was alert and eager to hear about her conversation with Jake. "Did you talk to him?" Marcus asked as soon as the captain entered his room. "I did, and he's very interested in the position. He'll be coming in Monday for the initial interview process." "I can no longer tell vision," Marcus smiled. The first genuine smile he had managed since the accident. "That's fantastic. Captain, I'm telling you, this guy is exactly what we need. He knew what he was doing out there last night. And more importantly, he did it without thinking twice about the consequences to himself." "I'm impressed with what I learned about him," Captain Wells agreed. "His military record is exemplary, and his civilian work history shows consistency and reliability. But Marcus, I have to ask, are you sure your judgment isn't clouded by gratitude? You went through a traumatic experience, and it's natural to feel especially positive towards someone who helped you." Marcus shifted carefully in his hospital bed, wincing slightly as his broken ribs protested the movement. "Captain, with respect, you know me well enough to know that I don't let emotions cloud my professional judgment. What impressed me about Jake wasn't just that he helped me. It was how he helped me. He assessed my injuries quickly and accurately, kept me conscious and calm, and took all the right steps to prevent my condition from getting worse. Plus, when he found out I was a SEAL, I could see the respect in his eyes. Not hero worship or curiosity, just genuine respect, from one warrior to another." Captain Wells nodded thoughtfully. Marcus was one of her most reliable team members, known for his level-headed assessment of people and situations. If he was this enthusiastic about Jake Martinez, there had to be substance behind it. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "When the paramedics were loading me into the ambulance, I heard his boss yelling at him about abandoning his work. Jake didn't argue or make excuses. He just took it and focused on making sure I was okay. That tells me he's got his priorities straight and the strength to stick to his principles, even when it costs him. Speaking of which, I understand he was actually fired for helping you." Marcus's expression darkened. "Yeah, and that really bothers me. A guy does the right thing, potentially saves my life, and gets punished for it. What kind of person fires someone for helping an injured person? It makes me sick." Captain Wells had been thinking about this aspect of the situation as well. She had served in the military for over 20 years and had developed strong opinions about character and accountability. The idea that someone could be penalized for showing basic human decency struck her as fundamentally wrong. "Marcus, I want you to focus on your recovery and not worry about Jake's former employer. Sometimes people reveal their true character through their actions, and we just have to trust that there are consequences for that kind of behavior." What Marcus and Captain Wells didn't know was that Richard Kellerman was already beginning to face some of those consequences. Word of Jake's firing had spread quickly through the local automotive community, and several customers had called to express their displeasure. Mrs. Chen, whose car had been the supposed justification for Kellerman's anger, was particularly upset when she learned the full story. "You fired Jake Martinez for helping an injured person?" she had asked Kellerman over the phone. "That man has worked on my family's cars for 6 years. He's honest, skilled, and trustworthy. I can't believe you would do something so heartless." Similar calls had come from other longtime customers throughout the morning. Some were threatening to take their business elsewhere, while others simply wanted to express their disappointment. Kellerman found himself on the defensive, trying to explain his business decision to people who clearly thought he had acted poorly. Tony, the senior mechanic who had witnessed the confrontation, was also stirring up trouble within the shop. He had worked in the automotive industry for over 30 years and had never seen an employee fired for such a reason. During lunch break, he gathered the other mechanics and shared his thoughts. "What happened to Jake last night was completely wrong," Tony told the group. "The man helped save someone's life and got fired for it. If Kellerman can do that to Jake, he can do it to any of us. for any reason he wants to make up. The other mechanics murmured their agreement. Jake had been popular with his co-workers, known for sharing his knowledge and helping others when they ran into difficult problems. His firing had created a sense of unease and resentment that was beginning to affect morale throughout the shop. Back at his apartment, Jake spent the rest of Friday researching Naval Special Warfare Command and trying to prepare himself for Monday's interview. He read about the history of the SEALs, their training programs, and their various missions around the world. The more he learned, the more excited he became about the possibility of supporting their work. He also took time to clean and organize his tools, making sure everything was in perfect condition for potential demonstration during the interview process. His military experience had taught him the importance of preparation and attention to detail, lessons that had served him well throughout his civilian career. As the day progressed, Jake found himself thinking about Marcus Thompson and hoping that his surgery was going well. He considered calling the hospital for an update, but decided against it, not wanting to intrude on Marcus's privacy or recovery process. Instead, he made a mental note to ask Captain Wells about Marcus's condition when he saw her on Monday. That evening, Jake called his sister Maria to share the news about his job opportunity. Maria lived in Phoenix with her husband and 2 children, and Jake had always valued her perspective on important decisions. "Jake, this sounds incredible," Maria said after he explained the situation. "But, are you sure you're ready for that kind of environment again? I know you loved your time in the Army, but you also said you were glad to be done with military life when you got out." "This is different," Jake explained. "I wouldn't be in the military myself. I'd be a civilian contractor supporting their mission. I get to use my mechanical skills to help some of the best soldiers in the world do their jobs better. It feels like the perfect combination of everything I'm good at." "What about the security clearance and background check? Is there anything in your past that might be a problem?" Jake considered the question carefully. "I don't think so. My military record is clean. I've never been arrested, and my credit is good. The most controversial thing I've ever done is probably getting fired yesterday for helping someone," Maria laughed. "Well, if they hold that against you, then they're not the kind of people you want to work for anyway." As Sunday evening arrived, Jake felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation about the following day's interview. He had pressed his best shirt and pants, polished his shoes, and reviewed everything he could find about the job requirements. He knew this was potentially a life-changing opportunity, and he was determined to make the best possible impression. He went to bed early, setting 3 different alarms to make sure he wouldn't oversleep. As he lay in the darkness, Jake thought about the strange chain of events that had led him to this point. A random motorcycle accident in the rain had somehow opened a door to an opportunity he never could have imagined. Sometimes, life had a way of working out in the most unexpected ways. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze blowing in from the Pacific Ocean. Jake arrived at the Naval Special Warfare Command facility 30 minutes early, dressed in his best clothes and carrying a folder with all the requested documentation. The base was impressive, with modern buildings surrounded by high-security fences and multiple guard checkpoints. After completing the visitor registration process, Jake was escorted to a conference room where Captain Wells was waiting, along with 2 other officers and a civilian contractor who introduced himself as the current maintenance supervisor. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours, during which Jake answered detailed questions about his mechanical experience, his military background, and his ability to work in a high-security environment. "Jake," Captain Wells said toward the end of the interview, "we'd like to offer you a probationary position starting immediately. The first 90 days will be an evaluation period, during which you'll work under close supervision while your security clearance is processed. Are you interested?" Jake didn't hesitate. "Yes, ma'am. I'm very interested." "Excellent. Report here tomorrow morning at 07:00 hours for orientation and initial training. Congratulations, and welcome to the team." As Jake drove home from the base, he felt like he was floating on air. Not only had he landed an incredible new job, but he would be starting immediately with no gap in employment. The salary they had offered was nearly 50% more than what he had been making at Martinez Auto Repair, with full benefits and opportunities for advancement. What Jake didn't know was that while he was interviewing for his new position, Richard Kellerman was dealing with a crisis of his own. Shortly after opening time that morning, 6 San Diego police patrol cars had pulled up outside Martinez Auto Repair, their emergency lights flashing and creating quite a spectacle in the busy commercial district. Kellerman rushed outside, his mind racing with possibilities about what could have brought so much police attention to his business. The lead officer, a sergeant with over 20 years of experience, approached him with a serious expression. "Are you Richard Kellerman, owner of this establishment?" the sergeant asked. "Yes, I am," Kellerman replied nervously. "What's this all about, officer?" "We've received multiple complaints about your business practices, specifically regarding the termination of an employee named Jake Martinez. We understand he was fired for providing aid to an injured person." Kellerman felt his face flush with embarrassment and anger. "That's a private employment matter. I don't understand why the police would be involved in something like that." The sergeant exchanged glances with his colleagues before responding. "Mr. Kellerman, the injured person your former employee helped was a United States Navy SEAL. When word of his termination reached certain people in the military community, they felt it was appropriate to bring the matter to our attention. I don't care if he helped the president himself," Kellerman snapped, his anger overriding his common sense. "I run a business here, not a charity. My employees are paid to work, not to play hero, whenever they feel like it." The sergeant's expression hardened at Kellerman's dismissive tone. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your business licenses, employment records, and any documentation related to Mr. Martinez's termination. We've also received reports about potential labor violations and improper disposal of automotive waste fluids." Kellerman's stomach dropped. He knew that his record-keeping had been sloppy in recent years, and there were indeed some questionable practices regarding hazardous waste disposal. What had started as complaints about Jake's firing was apparently expanding into a comprehensive investigation of his entire operation. "This is harassment," Kellerman protested. "You can't just show up here and disrupt my business based on complaints from disgruntled customers. Actually, we can and we will," the sergeant replied calmly. "These complaints came from multiple sources, including several of your own employees and customers. When patterns of questionable behavior are reported, we have an obligation to investigate." Quote, as the police officers began their inspection of the premises, Kellerman retreated to his office and frantically began searching through filing cabinets for the documentation they had requested. He quickly realized that several required permits had expired. His workers' compensation insurance was behind on payments, and there was no proper manifest for the disposal of used oil and other hazardous materials. Meanwhile, Tony and the other mechanics watched the proceedings with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. While they were glad to see Kellerman being held accountable for his treatment of Jake, they also worried about the potential impact on their own jobs if the shop was forced to close. "This is what happens when you treat good people badly," Tony muttered to his coworker as they watched Kellerman argue with one of the officers. "Jake was the best mechanic we had, and Kellerman threw him away like garbage." By the end of the day, Kellerman had received citations for multiple violations and was facing potential fines totaling several $1,000s. The police had also contacted the Environmental Protection Agency about improper waste disposal, which could result in even more serious consequences. Several customers who witnessed the police investigation decided to take their business elsewhere, and 2 of his mechanics gave notice that they would be seeking employment with other shops. The story of Jake's firing and the subsequent police investigation spread quickly through social media and local news outlets. A reporter from the San Diego Union Tribune called Kellerman for comment, but he refused to speak to the press. The negative publicity was devastating for a business that depended heavily on trust and reputation within the community. 3 days later, Jake was settling into his new position at the Naval Special Warfare Command facility when Captain Wells approached him with an update about Marcus Thompson's condition. "Marcus is recovering well from his surgery," she reported. "The doctors expect him to make a full recovery, though he'll be on medical leave for several months while his leg heals. He asked me to tell you that he's grateful for what you did and hopes to meet you again under better circumstances. That's wonderful news, Jake replied. Please give him my best wishes for a speedy recovery. Captain Wells smiled. Actually, I have something else to tell you. Are you aware of what's been happening with your former employer? Jake looked puzzled. No. I've been focused on learning my new job. Why? What's going on? Captain Wells explained about the police investigation, the citations, and the negative publicity that Martinez Auto Repair had been receiving. Jake listened in amazement, hardly believing that his firing had triggered such a chain of events. I never wanted any of this to happen, Jake said when she finished. I just wanted to help Marcus and move on with my life. Jake, sometimes standing up for what's right has consequences that go beyond what we can see in the moment, Captain Wells replied. Your decision to help Marcus revealed something important about both your character and your former boss's character. The community responded accordingly. What do you mean? When word got out about why you were fired, it struck a nerve with a lot of people. Veterans, active duty military, police officers, firefighters, and ordinary citizens who believe in doing the right thing. They were offended that someone could be punished for showing basic human decency. So they decided to take action. Jake was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Captain, I need to be honest with you. Part of me feels bad about what's happening to Kellerman. I never wanted to destroy his business or cost other people their jobs. Captain Wells nodded approvingly. That response tells me that we made the right choice in hiring you. A person with no conscience would be celebrating his former boss's troubles. But you're thinking about the bigger picture and the impact on innocent people. That's the kind of character we need in this organization. Over the following weeks, Jake threw himself into learning his new job with enthusiasm and determination. He worked on specialized vehicles he had never seen before, learned about cutting-edge technology, and gradually earned the respect of the SEAL teams he was supporting. His military background helped him understand the culture and expectations, while his mechanical expertise proved invaluable in maintaining complex equipment. The work was challenging and demanding, with strict deadlines and zero tolerance for mistakes. But Jake thrived in the high-pressure environment, finding fulfillment in knowing that his work directly supported the missions of America's most elite warriors. Every vehicle he repaired or maintained could potentially save lives in combat situations. Marcus Thompson returned to limited duty after 2 months of recovery, walking with a slight limp but otherwise fully healed from his injuries. When he and Jake finally met again, it was in the garage, where Jake was working on a modified assault vehicle. Jake Martinez, Marcus said with a broad smile, extending his hand. It's good to see you again, under better circumstances. Marcus, how are you feeling? How's the leg? Jake asked, genuinely pleased to see his friend looking healthy and strong. The leg's good as new, thanks to you keeping me stable that night. I wanted to thank you properly for what you did, and also for what happened afterward. What do you mean? Marcus explained how Captain Wells had told him about Jake's situation and how the recommendation had come about. When I heard that you'd been fired for helping me, I knew I had to do something. Captain Wells and I talked about it, and we both agreed that we needed someone with your character and skills on our team. Jake was moved by Marcus's words. You didn't owe me anything for that night. I just did what anyone should have done in that situation. That's exactly my point, Marcus replied. Not everyone would have done what you did. Most people would have called 911 and waited inside where it was warm and dry. You came out in the rain, stayed with a stranger, and made sure I was okay. Then you took the consequences for it without complaining or making excuses. That's the kind of person we want supporting our missions. As they talked, Jake learned more about Marcus's background and service record. He was a 26-year-old from rural Texas who had joined the Navy straight out of high school and worked his way into the SEAL program through sheer determination and ability. His teammates respected him for his tactical skills, his reliability under pressure, and his unwavering loyalty to his brothers in arms. You know, Marcus said, as their conversation continued, there's something poetic about how this all worked out. You helped me when I needed it most. And in return, I was able to help you find a job where your skills and character are truly valued. It's like the universe was balancing the scales." Quote. Jake nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that too. If Kellerman hadn't fired me, I never would have been available for this opportunity. In a weird way, his decision to punish me for doing the right thing ended up being the best thing that could have happened to my career." "Speaking of Kellerman," Marcus said, "have you heard the latest about what's happening with his business?" Jake shook his head. He had deliberately avoided following news about his former employer, preferring to focus on his new life rather than dwelling on past grievances. Marcus filled him in on the latest developments. Martinez Auto Repair had been forced to pay significant fines for various violations, and the negative publicity had driven away many customers. 3 of Kellerman's experienced mechanics had quit to work for competitors, and there were rumors that he might have to close at least one of his 3 locations. "I can't say I feel sorry for him," Marcus admitted. "The man showed his true character when he fired you, and now he's facing the consequences of that decision." Jake felt conflicted about Kellerman's troubles. While he couldn't deny a certain sense of vindication, he also felt sympathy for the innocent employees and customers who were being affected by the situation. It was a reminder that actions often have consequences that extend far beyond what we initially expect. As months passed, Jake's reputation within the Naval Special Warfare Command continued to grow. His supervisor regularly praised his work, and several SEAL teams specifically requested that he handle maintenance on their vehicles. He had found his calling in supporting the mission of these elite warriors, and they had found in him a mechanic they could trust with their lives. The friendship between Jake and Marcus also deepened over time. They discovered common interests beyond their military service, including a shared love of classic motorcycles and American history. Marcus often sought out Jake's advice on mechanical projects, while Jake valued Marcus's insights about leadership and teamwork. One evening, as they were finishing up work on a particularly complex piece of equipment, Marcus brought up a subject that had been on his mind for weeks. "Jake, I've been thinking about starting a non-profit organization to help veterans transition into civilian careers, something that would provide job training, placement services, and mentorship programs. Would you be interested in helping me develop the idea?" Jake looked up from the engine he was working on, intrigued by the proposal. "Tell me more about what you have in mind." Marcus explained his vision for an organization that would bridge the gap between military service and civilian employment, helping veterans translate their skills and experience into meaningful careers. He had seen too many good people struggle with the transition, often ending up in jobs that didn't utilize their full potential. "I keep thinking about what happened to you," Marcus continued. "Here you were, a skilled mechanic with an exemplary military record, working for someone who didn't appreciate your value or character. How many other veterans are in similar situations, underemployed, or working for people who don't understand what they have to offer?" Jake was immediately drawn to the concept. His own experience had shown him how important it was to find work that aligned with his values and utilized his skills. He also knew many veterans who had struggled with the transition to civilian life, despite having valuable experience and strong work ethics. "I think it's a brilliant idea," Jake said enthusiastically. "Count me in. When do we start?" The 2 men spent the next several hours discussing their ideas and making preliminary plans for the organization. They would call it Bridge to Service, reflecting their mission of helping veterans bridge the gap between military and civilian careers while continuing to serve their communities in new ways. As Jake drove home that night, he reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought him to this point in his life. A random act of compassion on a rainy evening had not only saved a man's life, but had also opened doors to opportunities he never could have imagined. His willingness to help a stranger had cost him one job, but led him to a much better one. It had also brought him a friendship that was evolving into a partnership with the potential to help countless other veterans. The story served as a powerful reminder that doing the right thing, even when it comes at a personal cost, often leads to unexpected rewards and opportunities. Jake's decision to help Marcus Thompson had revealed his true character and ultimately connected him with people who valued that character. Meanwhile, Richard Kellerman's decision to punish Jake for his compassion had revealed his own character and led to consequences he never anticipated. In the end, both men had received exactly what their actions deserved. Jake's kindness and courage had been rewarded with new opportunities and meaningful relationships. Kellerman's callousness and poor judgment had cost him his reputation, his business, and the respect of his community. The universe, it seemed, had indeed balanced the scales of justice in its own perfect way.